Breaking news. A North Carolina judge has rejected a Republican effort to toss out 60,000 lawful votes. Welcome back to Democracy Docket. I'm Mark Elias.
And I'm Paige Moskowitz. Let's get started.
Paige, so we just got this news out of North Carolina that, in one of the many lawsuits that Republicans have brought to try to throw out a whole bunch of ballots. Now, this is all aimed at the state Supreme Court race that is hanging, that is very, very close, razor thin. But this one was broader than that. Paige, when are they going to stop their efforts at disenfranchisement?
Mark, you would think that the Republican Party would just give up already, right? They have been defeated in court so many times over this issue, yet they keep bringing it up. This lawsuit specifically follows an earlier one that the RNC filed in August of 2024, claiming that there were 225,000 faulty registrants on North Carolina's voter rolls. They sought to purge those voters just a few short weeks before the election. The courts turned them down then, and now after the election, they're claiming that 60,000 of those voters should have their ballots tossed. Now, this is a separate lawsuit from Jefferson Griffin's case challenging the outcome of the North Carolina Supreme Court election. They're both challenging 60,000 votes. The Wake County Superior Court rejected the RNC's injunction request, and litigation remains ongoing.
Yeah, and I think that this is a really important thing for everyone to pay attention to. The Republicans are not done with their voter suppression activities. They are not done being the party of election deniers. People figured, all right, well, before the election, they were all about, trying to change the rules and trying to throw out ballots and try to make it harder to vote. But after all, Donald Trump won and now they would be done. No, we are seeing this in state after state at Democracy Docket Page, where they are not dismissing their efforts. They are doubling down on their efforts. And there's no better example than what, as you said, is happening in North Carolina. They tried to disenfranchise and sort of kick off the rolls over 200,000 voters when that didn't fail, even though Donald Trump won the state of North Carolina for president, even though due to their gerrymandering efforts, they did, they control the state legislature. Now they lost the governorship, they lost the AG race, and they have lost this very close state Supreme Court race. And I think that is part of, as I mentioned, the impetus for this energy behind, lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit that we see going on right now in North Carolina. But it is also part of a larger national plan. And I fear, Paige, that if people on the pro-voting side think that this is over and let their guard down, there's not going to be as much fighting back on the Republicans. But I can promise you this. For those people who are subscribed to Democracy Docket, that's not the case there. So make sure you're subscribed. The link is above and in the show notes below.
Mark, and help us understand this lawsuit better. What exactly are Republicans challenging? What is their claim with these ballots or these voters?
Yeah, so this all goes back to an old North Carolina law that's been on the books for some time now, which Republicans say requires when people register to vote, they include their driver's license number, their social security number. A whole bunch of people filled out a form prepared by the state of North Carolina that did not require that information, and were never told that there was a mistake, and there wasn't a mistake. I mean, the thing is, the voters are actually doing exactly the thing that the forms and the election officials in North Carolina told them to do. Now, after the fact, the Republicans have decided that they're going to litigate over this. And, it's one thing to litigate over whether the form ought to be different going forward. Is another thing to say that, oh, by the way, all these people who've been voting for years, by the way, not just in this election, but in past elections, should all of a sudden now be kicked off and their ballots thrown out, is just the kind of gross anti-voting behavior that we've come to expect from Republicans. But again, Paige, I am very worried because when we described this to people before the election, there was universal outrage. And my fear is right now the legacy media is sort of off this team. They're too busy, with their billionaire owners sucking up to Donald Trump in every way possible. And I think a lot of people are just tired of hearing about election news and voting news. But I got to tell you, people got to pay attention to this one because it not only affects these voters, but as I said, it is part of this effort to steal this state Supreme Court seat. And we cannot let that happen in North Carolina.
Mark, we've talked about this North Carolina Supreme Court election at length. You can check out our latest interview with Supreme Court Justice Allison Riggs, who gives us the latest update on the fight to count votes there. Like you said, Riggs defeated her Republican opponent by just over 700 votes. Obviously, 60,000 votes is a lot more than 700 votes. But I want to hone in on something you said, that this Republican lawsuit isn't challenging that these voters were ineligible. It isn't saying that the voters did something wrong. They're saying that the state did something wrong, so these voters shouldn't have their voices heard. Their ballot should be tossed out. It was a state action, but the voters should bear the fault.
Yeah, and this is reminiscent of the Trump lawsuits we saw after the 2020 election. Remember in Wisconsin, Paige? There, they argued that a voter registration effort that took place in a park that registered a whole bunch of people and people voted, and and it was sort of a community, a civically designed effort by the municipality. They argued after the fact that those ballots should all be tossed out. We saw in Pennsylvania in 2020 and in Georgia in 2020, where Republicans, after the election was over, wanted to throw out tens of thousands of votes. And Paige, I think it's really important to emphasize something now you said, which is that the margin here is actually quite small. The margin here is quite small, and there has been a count and a recount and another recount. So the margin is not changing, but it's a small margin. But the legal theory they have here isn't to garner them, 800 votes or 1,000 votes. It is they are returning to this very big theory that would lead to the disenfranchisement of tens of thousands. And I think that is not just about winning this race, but it is about setting a precedent, because there is no instance in recent history where a court has ordered the retroactive disenfranchisement of tens of thousands of votes. And they were unable to get that done in 2020. Kerry Lake and all of that nonsense, the various people weren't able to make any headway in their election denying efforts in 2022. And this is kind of a little bit below the radar way. I mean, it's not below your radar and my radar, but it's below the legacy media's radar to try to achieve that. So then in 2026 and 2028, when we're dealing with higher profile federal elections, they can say, oh, what do you mean this is unusual? Look what happened in North Carolina.
Mike, I have a logistical question about how this would work. So the Republicans are saying, these 60,000 voters had incomplete voter registrations. Their ballot should be removed from vote counts, the total vote counts. How do you even find and identify those ballots, right? Because don't we have a right to a secret ballot? Once I submit my ballot, I relinquish it to the voting machine, to the election officials. There's no way to tie that ballot back to me, right? So how do you find all of these supposedly ineligible ballots from people who had incomplete registrations?
Paige, details. The Republicans, they're not detail people. Like when it comes to disenfranchisement, they're more in the wholesale business. They're disenfranchising by the pallet. They're not worried about the the one-off here and there. So look, I think you raise a very important question. I think that for the state Supreme Court race, what they want is a new election, right? So what they'll say is look, who knows, new election. I think that for the RNC, they want the precedent, right? So this is in some ways suits the interests of both this judicial election candidate, this Republican running for state Supreme Court, and it also suits the larger interests of the National Republican Party and the MAGA Trump movement. And one of the things that as we head towards next week and the swearing in of Donald Trump, that I want to make sure everyone knows is that Democracy Docket will be doing more and more coverage of the Trump, the new Trump 2.0, of everything that he is trying to do, but also, Paige, we have new state legislatures coming into power, and they will be taking things like this. I mean, you can be sure the Republican legislature in North Carolina will find some terrible way to turn this into a bad bill. We have seen Republican legislatures before, be very active in trying to take the worst ideas of voter suppression and election subversion and turn them into laws. And I know, Paige, that is something that you and the Democracy Docket team are going to focus on, and it's something that you and I in this video series are.
We've seen this already. Last year, the North Carolina legislature, when it still had a Republican supermajority during its lame duck session, Republicans knew that they had lost the supermajority. They knew that they had lost the governor's race. They knew that they had lost the AG's race. They pushed through a last-minute power grab bill to kind of reapportion power and take away the power to appoint members of the North Carolina State Board of Election from the governor, who was an incoming Democrat, and give it to the state legislature, to the Republican Party that just lost its supermajority power, but still wants to have unwieldy influence over elections. Oh, by the way, who is the defendant in these lawsuits from Republicans challenging 60,000 votes? The North Carolina State Board of Election.
Yeah. So please make sure you are subscribed to Democracy Doc. It's free, daily and weekly newsletters. It is more important now than ever before, and we will see you next time.